So it was December, and I decided that I'm not going to start the year in New York. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. But whatever was in the way of my happiness, whether it was like a lease or a job, I would find a way out of it. And I packed my stuff and I packed everything and left within like 3 weeks.
Have you ever dreamed of making a radical shift? What does it take to build a more intentional life? What is gained from reconnecting with yourself, with community, and with the natural world? I'm Alyssa Hessler. I've spent the last decade meeting with people all over the world who have made remarkable transitions in their lives. How did they do it? What did they sacrifice? And what have they learned? Stepping away from convention isn't easy, but we all have the power to reclaim the things that we've lost, to slow down, to change course, to create the life we want for ourselves and for future generations. The Urban Exodus podcast shares practical advice and inspirational words to embolden and guide you on your own journey. These are the stories of those brave enough to venture down the road less traveled. This is the Urban Exodus. Urban Exodus is community-supported programming. Please consider sponsoring an episode or making a contribution so we can keep these conversations going. The easiest way to contribute is to click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com. You can also become a member of the Urban Exodus community to peruse our archives of hundreds of photo stories and interviews of people who left city life, or subscribe to Apple Podcast Premium to have access to bonus episodes, our rapid-fire interviews with guests, and our new mini podcast, Ditch the City, where I answer listeners' questions and offer practical advice on a whole myriad of topics. If you have a question for an upcoming episode that you'd like us to consider, please send us a DM on Instagram or through our Contact Us page. Thank you for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do it without all of you. And if you haven't already, we would really love it if you'd leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever service you listen on. And please recommend Urban Exodus to your friends. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Shala Monroque. Shala is a Saint-Lucian native who chased her big city dreams to New York in the early 2000s. Shala was a verifiable it girl of the art and fashion worlds. She glossed the pages of numerous magazines and street-style blogs. She was the creative director at Garage, an independent fashion magazine, and also worked as a consultant for Prada. Shala was by all accounts on top of the world, but in reality, she battled burnout, depression, and unshakable homesickness. In 2012, Shala returned to St. Lucia after her brother was in a near-fatal car accident. She stayed for a few months while he returned to health. In 2014, she realized she didn't want to be away from her family any longer, and she made the decision to leave her sought-after career in fashion to move back home to St. Lucia. When she returned, she established a small organic farm on her family's land. She's taken up diving and photography, and she slowly found her way back into the fashion industry, working on her own terms. Along with the occasional Fashion Week appearances, Shala is currently working with different designers on collections that are environmentally focused. Shala's determination and commitment to herself and the natural world has allowed her to reimagine a future in fashion defined by balance, wellness, and ecological consciousness. This is a story about following your intuition, prioritizing your well-being, and earth-centric thinking. I am absolutely thrilled to have Shala Monroque on the podcast. Shala, you led a very successful and busy life in New York City, working in the fashion world. And you decided to return to your home country of St. Lucia and kind of change your life and really live a life on your own terms. And I'm really excited to have you on the podcast to share your story. And first off, I'd love that if if you would just share a little bit of your early backstory, kind of where you grew up and the path that you took that led you to New York and working in the fashion world.
Okay. I was born and raised in St. Lucia. My parents lived in the city, which was not much of a city. It was pretty rural as well. And my grandmother lived in the countryside where I am now. The times that I spent with her were the most memorable. So she was a widow by the time I remember her growing up, and they had been subsistence farmers. So it was a different kind of existence than when my mother was a child, but she still always took us to the garden as children. So I grew up in a household with my grandmother and lots of cousins. So my grandmother had 9 children. And the way it works is that so there was like an urban migration back then where everyone from the country would move to the city to look for work. So that kind of life had sort of started disintegrating by then. On holidays, all of my aunts and uncles would send their kids down to my grandmother to take care of them because that gave them a bit of a break. So there was just this house filled with children. We didn't have running water. We didn't even have an indoor toilet then. There was no television. The way the house was built is that we didn't really even have glass windows. So it was hurricane shutters. So at the end of the day, there would be my grandmother and all these kids. And the way we entertained ourselves was through storytelling and like little theater making plays. That was kind of the life that we lived, pretty rural and simple. So that was kind of the foundation for me as a child. So I had that balance, but then I also grew up in the city with television at my parents. And so like He-Man and a lot of the 60s TV shows like Leave It to Beaver and Gilligan's Island. And so there's a lot of American TV, and you kind of got a glimpse of a different life that was very enticing, I would say. So that was kind of what would have drawn me to want to move to America. I think it was on TV, it's presented as, the life, like who wants to have mud on their shoes and climb mountains and all of that. So there was that allure there, but I think I have a very adventurous spirit, and I always, as a child, wanted to travel the world. I used to have like a special tree when I was growing up that I'd sit in every afternoon and watch the sunset into the ocean. Almost anywhere on St. Lucia, you could see the ocean. And I always remembered seeing the cargo ships coming in and going out on the afternoons. And I used to wonder, where they came from and where they were going. So that kind of gave me an outlook of wondering what the world had. So I think that was kind of where my fascination with travel came in. And I knew that if I stayed in St. Lucia, it would not be like an easy place to travel from. So then I moved to New York as an immigrant, really, without much.
Hi, I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
So what were those early years like for you in New York, kind of figuring out and like seeing, you had this idea of what the United States was in your mind, but then actually being there, what was that contrast like for you?
Oh my God, I remember the first time I came to New York, I was on vacation. I was 15 and I was so disappointed. Like, I remember the car driving across the bridge over into Manhattan, and it was so loud and it stunk. And it was like, what is everybody raving about? It's not the image that I'd had in my mind. I remember the first picture I'd seen of Manhattan. I was in secondary school, and it was an aerial view of Manhattan, and it just seemed so complex to me. And then I remember coming out of the subway the first time I took it, and I might have been somewhere near the Empire State Building or something, and just saw all these buildings rising up, and it just felt so impenetrable. Like, how do you navigate this? So I moved with my uncle. My uncle had lived in Queens for a while, and my mother kind of saw my frustration here in St. Lucia as I was a teenager still, like bouncing around. I'd been like a wedding coordinator here, like just not sure where you fit in. I was a bit depressed, and she kind of felt like I needed to go out and explore and sent me over to my uncle. I thought I was just going to babysit, because that's what every Caribbean person does. And that didn't pan out. So that dream was dashed pretty quickly. But then I had a friend from St. Lucia who was a young photographer, and he kind of got me my first job at a daylight studio. So that was kind of like my first peek into the fashion world, although it was more of a still life photography studio. There was a bit of fashion shoots happening. So that was kind of like a peek into what fashion was, but that didn't pay much. And I figured out early on that, waiters and waitresses made more money. So I'm like, I'm going to be a waitress, because I wasn't like on the books. So then I worked at one of the trendy restaurants in Manhattan, and that was like another glimpse. But when I first got to New York, it was really daunting. I remember thinking, like on my first day to work, taking the bus from Rosedale, Queens in Long Island to Queens, and then to the city. That was like a 2-hour trek. And just looking at the city again, like, how do you navigate this? And I remember thinking, I need to like I had this visual of myself with my back against the wall, just like, you need like a year to kind of understand this. It felt daunting. Manhattan's a grid. Like, that's how I see it. That's how my brain sees it. And that made it easier to get around. Like, I always would just take the train and just like stop anywhere. And I spent a lot of times at Barnes and Nobles. I'm remembering this now. I'm like sitting there and going through books. That was before, well, there was Google, but you didn't have access. I could spend a lot of time in the photography section, just anything.
You got your start kind of working in photo studios, but what was it about fashion that really drew you in? I know that fashion can be really enticing, and there's so much creativity in fashion. It's very artistic. I wondered like what you initially were drawn to in that industry, and then you were really catapulted into fame, I would say. So I wondered what that feeling was like.
It kind of happened like that. It happened really quickly. I didn't go the traditional route. At that point, it wasn't necessarily something that I was looking to do. I'd been like in the earliest stages of me being in New York as a young Black girl. I was too short and too Black really for modeling, which any young girl who was skinny who got to New York would have tried to do. So I figured really early on, like, that's not for me. But then I was dating my boyfriend at the time, who was traveling a lot, had galleries all around the world. And so the fashion crowd kind of intersects with that. And then my friend Dasha Zhukova got invited to edit Pop magazine, and she kind of pulled a bunch of her friends to become editors. And we were kind of all on the same page. We like clothes and we like to dress up, but then the industry was something else. It wasn't really part of our world, say. So we kind of just dove in cold feet, just like went in without, it wasn't something that I was seeking at the time. And so I remember, it's really because like Pop was sort of a fashion/art magazine. And so I think the publisher at the time was interested in her perspective and the group of people that she was around, and we were all traveling. So it was just a different point of view. Me not really knowing about fashion, about the fashion industry, I kind of just like subscribed to all the fashion newspapers and magazines, and decided to go to the shows just to teach myself that way. That was kind of how it happened, really.
What did you love about it, and what was really hard about it? Because I think that, from an outsider's perspective, I think there's a lot of glitz and glamour associated with fashion and with the art world. But I think like oftentimes once you get into one of those industries, you start to see like the harsher realities of those industries. And I wonder what your experience was like.
what I liked about it most was exploring ideas, like getting with a group of people and then discussing the things that you'd seen around art around the world, what was of the moment, and then kind of flushing that out creatively. When we first started, with Garage, it was pretty independent. So we had that luxury at that time to have a really authentic voice because we were just expressing ourselves without the constraints of the industry. And then as it grew and then you started getting more advertisers, then that kind of like clamps down on your voice because you're not, just because of the business and the politics of it, like some designers don't want to be seen shot with others. And then that just like these little things can get in the way creatively. For me, one of the things that was a little bit tricky is that I lived in New York and the team and office was in London. So like working from home is a bit of a challenge creatively, not being inside of that office culture. It was good on the one hand because I was out there living and seeing what was going on and reporting in, but then working from home is a little bit tricky sometimes. Jet lag, travel, and between the two worlds, between the art world and the fashion world, it kind of felt like Groundhog Day a lot. You'd leave New York and get to London or then to Venice, and it's the same people having the same conversations over and over and over again. That was hard for me. What else? I don't know. It was just kind of felt like there wasn't, once I understood it, then I understood it, and it didn't really stimulate me anymore because it just felt like the same cycles being repeated over and over again.
Once you like are able to integrate and like really see behind the curtain of things that seem so kind of amazing and glossy and glitzy on the outside, you're like, oh, this is what this is.
Yeah. And then the lifestyle, as glamorous as it seems, didn't necessarily go with my consciousness, I think. And I don't think I was really aware of that at the time. I knew I was uncomfortable, but I understand it now more that I live in a garden. Like just that, like now that I'm here, I go to bed really early, I wake up really early, and that feels good. You go out and you're out every night and you have like one cocktail and two cocktails and you sit down at dinner and then you have a glass of wine and then another and then dessert wine and then it adds up and it's really kind of hard on your body. And I didn't grow up that way. Like we didn't really have that culture when I was growing up. So it's not really who I am. And then you wake up one day and you're like, who am I? Why am I going to these things that I don't enjoy? Like I don't necessarily enjoy the conversations, and why should I continue?
Let's explore that, because you made a big decision and you decided that you were going to pick up and you were going to move back to St. Lucia. I wonder what the reaction was from your friends, both in the fashion and art world, and also your family back in St. Lucia.
I didn't really tell anyone when I was leaving, and it happened quickly and it happened slowly. So for about 2 years, I suffered major depression because of it, because I kind of slowly stopped answering to invites and spending more time at home and having major anxiety because I could feel that I didn't want to live in the city anymore, that it wasn't healthy for me. But then I was also like at the peak of my career. So like the pulling of these two sides of myself was really, really hard. So by the end of it, I remember I had returned to New York from a trip back home and I stayed in bed for like 3 days. And you can do that in New York because you can order anything and have it delivered to your doorstep. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, medicine, whatever you needed. And I woke up on the third day and that was just it for me. I'm like, why am I staying here? Like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I remember calling my mother and telling her, so she was the first person I told, I think I want to come home. And she was really good with it. She was like, well, it's home. If you come home, then you're home. It's okay. If you really feel that way, then, come back. And so I kind of felt like I had that permission from her, and it was quick. So it was December. And I decided that I'm not going to start the year in New York. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. But whatever was in the way of my happiness, whether it was like a lease or a job, I would find a way out of it. And I packed my stuff and I packed everything and left within like 3 weeks. Like I didn't tell anybody. I told like my closest friends and I just left quietly. And my friends here, like, I think still some of them don't understand it. What are you doing here? Especially like my day-to-day life here now, like they don't get it, but then they do because they know me.
Calling all small business owners. Are you looking to expand your customer base beyond the reach of your local community? Speak to our loyal audience of over 38,000 listeners by sponsoring an episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. For more information, visit urbanexodus.com/podcast.
I mean, I think that it's so difficult to tap into your inner voice, especially when you're living in a city and there are just so many distractions and things imposed upon your time, your headspace, your energy. What advice would you give to people who maybe what you're saying is really resonating with their experience right now on ways to find that courage point to pull themselves out of a situation that isn't working for them anymore?
Courage is a big part of it. I remember having a conversation with my cousin here in St. Lucia before I'd moved back while I was really depressed. And she had suffered postpartum depression before as well. And she said to me, Shala, you know, I've come to the conclusion in my life that anything that stands in the way of my happiness, I'm going to cut it out. So if it's a boyfriend, a job, a city, a house, whatever it is, it gets cut out. If I want to sleep for 24 hours, then I sleep. I think you have to allow yourself the space to hear yourself. And I think for me, I was just kind of resolute that nothing was going to get in the way of my happiness. I think for a long time too, just prior to that, I kept hearing this voice say, you only have one life, one. You only get one shot as far as we know. At least you have this one life. Like, what are you going to do with it? Are you happy? Are you going to be happy if you died like 5 years down the road and you didn't do what you wanted to do? So I think it's about honoring yourself and to be brave, to have courage. All of the answers are not going to come immediately, and that's okay. And slowing down is okay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because society, and I mean, it's really driven by capitalism, is like this, people are commodities and our time is not our own. And you are seen as being good if you are kind of functioning like a machine would, never stopping, never taking time, never like allowing yourself agency over your own body and decisions. What was it like to transition back to rural life? What did that like kind of early like step back into St. Lucia feel like? And what did you notice about yourself? And what did you learn from that experience?
I didn't know what I was coming back to do per se. And I remember I'd always visit the countryside whenever I came home. And I remember visiting my cousins one day and then coming into the house. Somebody was squatting there and I was talking to him. He was a farmer. And there was this moment where I took a photograph of him and I just got the chills that I need to be here. I'm going to live here. And I remember driving back home to my mother and my chest hurt because I couldn't understand the transition at that point. Like, how am I going to do this? This is so crazy. But it wouldn't leave me alone. And then it kind of happened organically too. I'd always wanted to repair the house. So it started with that. And I thought I was just going to paint it. And then it was kind of termite infested. So I knocked it down. And then I started spending more time here. And then to build a house, like I milled some trees from around. So it kind of just slowly happened. I didn't live here at first. I would drive, I would commute back and forth. It wasn't so hard as well because it's a small village and everyone's related. Like everybody's related and everybody knows you and knows your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother and can tell you so many stories about yourself. So in many ways, it was good. It was like a homecoming, but it's also slow. So as a New Yorker coming back here, I had to learn to slow down a bit.
I would love if you would describe your home, the land where you live, and the places that you go to feel inspired and reinvigorated there.
So I live in a small rainforest village. It's kind of really in the interior of St. Lucia, very lush. It's pretty much a huge food forest because everybody here was farming and farming for miles before and planted so many tree crops. It's quiet. It's very quiet, and the pace is slowed down more. It kind of feels like a bit in some ways like 30 years ago compared to the rest of St. Lucia. At night, like by 7, 8 p.m., everyone's indoors for the most part. And it's quiet. A lot of like animal activity at night, like the sounds of crickets and birds in the morning. Like you really feel like you live in the jungle, really. And it's very communal because everybody is related. Then we really share the space and what we have. Very quiet, again, I will say. So I wake up really early. Now I feel like I'm in a bit of a transition, but for the most part, I've been like clearing the land and planting, and most of it myself. I think that was just my own catharsis, like clearing the land, and I cleared the land and planted it. I was learning so much more about myself, and I really enjoyed this. Like I felt really happy here. I felt a joy to wake up and go into the garden because it helped me think creatively as well. Then you sleep really well too. I don't know. I guess you can attest to that because you're. I think farmers sleep the best because you're so tired. Your body's so tired. That's like one difference, I think, because in New York, I'd always need to take like Tylenol PM to calm down. Like I would just be buzzing at night. Yeah. And I haven't touched any pills since I've been here. One of the big differences I noticed when I first came back, I remember thinking there are no children here. Because when I was growing up, there were so many children outside. Like we would torture everybody's trees. We'd be at the sandpipe playing outside, playing cricket. There's just children everywhere. And I came back and I couldn't see any children. I'm like, where are they? There are no children here. One day I was driving really early in the morning and there they were, like walking to school, but then I wouldn't see them in the afternoon. And then I realized the technology had taken over. They weren't outside anymore. Everybody was in on their phones. So that's one big difference about life here. It's kind of sad. There's some, like my neighbors here, the children are outside for the most part. So that's like a little glimpse of how life used to be for me. But most of them are indoors.
That's so sad that technology is just like spreading everywhere and really cutting off the wonder of childhood and the connection to nature, right? Because I think that's such a big part of you clearing the land and planting the land. For me, detoxing from like corporate world to a little piece of land and cultivating that land, it was so healing. I just didn't realize just how much it was healing me, but I had to do it. And what are you able to grow there?
I've kind of given up on vegetables for the moment, mainly because of the terrain. Like it's so steep. Like it's really, really steep. It's crazy. When I look at what I've done the past 8 years, it feels a little bit like insanity. My body's feeling it. So now I'm focused more on the tree crops and just maintaining that because it rains here a lot. So everything grows back really quickly. So I'm always kind of managing it. But so I have breadfruit trees, coconuts, mangoes, a lot of citrus, papayas, yams, guava, like lots of fruit, like a lot of tropical fruits, sorrel sometimes, just any fruit tree that I can find and planting and really nurturing at the moment. I had this vision that the moment you stepped onto the property, there should just be like wherever your hands could reach, it should be edible. So for that reason, I didn't even plant flowers for a long time. It was just food everywhere and herbs. The other nice thing too about the herbs, because I'm doing this organically, I get a lot of herbs that are growing back naturally that's kind of lost in most places because spraying just kills them out.
You described before really struggling with the physical symptoms of stress and depression while living in New York City. So I wonder how you have seen, your mental and physical and spiritual health change since relocating back there.
I think a lot more mental clarity, a reconnecting with who you are. When you take away, like, even just, for example, sleeping pills or Tylenol PM, for example, that just clears your brain, first of all. And then you get back on the circadian rhythm. So I think that's healthier. Life is slower, which I think it's meant to be, not at that speed that like capitalist society propagates. A more natural way of being. I don't feel a need to party as much or go out because I'm so fulfilled with the garden. Maybe sometimes I wonder if unhealthily so, because I most of the time I don't really even feel the need for company because I'm happy with the plants. Just you're more calm. I think just looking at trees and hearing the sounds of the birds and wind really is what we're meant to be around for our spirit. Yeah, and I feel like I'm doing something good. I'm leaving plants behind, I'm doing something good for the earth. So I feel better about myself in that regard compared to consuming, and like leaving waste on the planet. So I think that feels better for my soul.
Absolutely. My previous job before I moved here was selling and marketing cell phones. And it was so not aligned with my values. And I just felt like if I did good at my job, the repercussions of that were people trading in their cell phones faster. And I wondered, now having this time to kind of reflect on the fashion industry, I know you've dipped your toes back in, but I wondered, like, how should this industry and also consumers kind of start changing and evolving their thinking to really be mindful of their own consumption and what they're creating to put out into the world for people to consume?
The thinking around it needs to be is it necessary what you're producing? I think we should be at a stage where we're thinking of necessity. There's really so much that gets produced, especially in fashion, when increasingly you have more seasons for clothes that you don't need. It's part of a wider culture. So I'll segue a bit. I took this raw food class with Aris Latham, and he was saying that his students always ask, that it's so much more expensive to eat this way, to eat like be on a live raw food diet. And his response to that was that, I want to live in a luxurious body, that it's worth it, whatever it costs to put in my body, and that we have everything backwards. It's food, clothing, and shelter. The thing that you're supposed to spend the most money on is your food. But we'll spend like thousands of dollars on a shoe or on a dress or on the latest sneaker, and then build a huge, ridiculous house that requires you to spend so much money and then pay the least amount of food, which we end up paying back on the back end anyway, where later down the road you have cancer or you have some rare disease that was caused by your diet early on. So you end up paying it anyway through medical bills. So I think it's about reprioritizing. Why are we producing things, and are they made in a good way? Like, are the people manufacturing them being treated well? I think I don't like to use the word consumer because I don't want to propagate that ideology, but I think the customers have a lot of power in that. I think it starts with us. What are we going to spend on? Like, I think we need to be more aware and active in the choices that we make and where we spend our money. Like, how is it made? Is it made in a good way? Why are we purchasing it? I think the culture on the whole needs to change. Yet still, fashion really needs to look itself deeply in the mirror and acknowledge the amount of waste that it produces, and also just the culture on the whole. Like, what is this about? Why do we need new clothes every 2 months? I think there's a huge responsibility, huge responsibility, because fashion is a language that speaks to everybody worldwide. Like, it communicates, there's no language barrier. Like, there's no verbal language barrier. You see it and you understand, and it can affect your ways of consuming and of viewing the world. So it has a very big responsibility. And I think it has the power to look at itself and redress it and change what the culture is. I see that it says that it's trying, but I feel like it could do so much better, especially post-pandemic. I feel like there's a lot of posturing going on still.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of you who have made contributions to offset the production costs of this podcast. It means so much to me that you find enough meaning and value to pledge your support to keep this going. If you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy for you. Just click the support button on the top of Urban Exodus website. You can also get access to bonus episodes, rapid fire interviews, and our new mini podcast, Ditch the City, by signing up for our Apple Podcast Premium. Or you could become a member of the Urban Exodus online community, where you can access hundreds of photo stories, interviews, tutorials, videos, and more. Find out more by visiting the membership page on urbanexodus.com.
I mean, the posturing and the greenwashing of the industry and calling things sustainable, but then just like peeking a little bit over the fence, and you're like, I see a few kinks still that you need to work out here. And I mean, fashion is like the second largest kind of polluter next to oil and gas. And as someone that's living in an island nation, that has grown up in an island nation, I wondered, like, what effects of climate change you are noticing in your community, and just any words that you had for people on, I don't want to shame anyone in their consumption habits or things, but I do think that we've reached a point in our society where, like, we consume to fill that hole that we have lost, which is the reconnection with Earth.
For me here, I don't really see it. We have hurricanes. I would say, again, going back to the pollution, if you have clogged rivers and dirty oceans, your fish is eating plastic and we're eating that, then that's a big problem. And that's going to be a huge problem really, really soon. So I think we need to change our social climate. Here, to be honest, I don't see it. It's not much different than when I was growing up, per se, in terms of the weather, but the pollution is a problem, which I think contributes to climate change on a whole.
Absolutely. I mean, just the plastics in the ocean and the plastics that go into the food chain. And I remember reading that supposedly every human basically eats like a credit card's worth of plastic in a week now, which is just like so wild to even think. But it's everywhere and we can't escape it. I appreciate that, you are a very deeply creative and artistic person and a big thinker as well. And so I wondered, like, how your creative expression now manifests, because I know that you've kind of dipped your toe back into creating art and working with companies that you really believe in to kind of maybe even solve some of these problems, but also just to make beautiful things. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Again, I think it's more also about slowing down and having time to think, the luxury to think and to take your time to think slowly. Just being in a garden, you get like 1,000,001 ideas. And I think that helps you process thoughts differently, slowly, solitarily, for me anyway, most of the time. So that would definitely inform anything that I do now. I also know that anything that I take part in creatively has to be meaningful. So slowly, like dipping my toe back in. For example, one of the brands that I'm working with is called Femme Monde, which is Haitian Creole for Mountain Woman. And she's a Haitian designer based in Turkey. I love how she runs her studio. It's an atelier filled with women. They get paid a little bit more than what the average salary is. They sit down. It's very communal, and she has like a deep respect for the people who work for her. I know how things are made. Like a lot of her designs are repeated. It's not like thrown away. Like you can get something that you got like 2 years ago if you wanted it in another color. It's made to order. It's not like made and shipped out and then like dumped if it's not sold. So I like the ethos of her company. And it's also inspired a lot by the garden. So that's someone that I would definitely be drawn to work with. We're working on a project now. So that's interesting. I think a lot of the times if I'm stuck in an idea or looking for inspiration, then I'll go into the garden, even if it's just weeding, because then it helps me to clear my mind. And then so that would also inform the designs as well. So the pieces that we're working on for the moment is called Radical Blossoms, and it's more about plants that plant medicine really, and how like a plant can affect your mind in a really big way. So it's just thinking about that. So I think the garden really informs, and the earth really informs a lot of whatever I would put out right now. So even like the piece I did for Chloe, that short video we did for Instagram, it really is still the same message about taking care of the earth and living in tandem with it. So I think that's also one of the ways I think that fashion can just start rethinking and sending out that message, is to, support creatives who are on that path already.
I think that one thing that people are always worried about, if they're like working in, one industry and then they decide to leave and start anew, but maybe there were parts of it that they loved. How did you go about kind of planting the seeds or like reestablishing the bridges to the elements that you loved and kind of starting to dip your toe back into the work so that you were doing it on your own terms?
Early on, I got this idea that I wanted to garden in the morning and then be creative in the night. I thought not in the night, like in the afternoon. So, because then you work in the morning, and then the sun gets hot, and then you just finding that balance. That was the idea. It hasn't quite worked out that way because I think I spend more time in the garden. And so I'd have times to sit down, like after, you're tired and you're just sitting in repose and thinking about it. I was off of Instagram for a few years, which was nice. And then when I got back on again, I guess I started posting glimpses of my life here. So I think it came back to me. I wasn't again necessarily like looking to do it. I guess there's that itch too to connect creatively back with the world. And so like the designer from Chloe at the time reached out just personally because she was connecting as well. Like, I want a bit of that life. Like, it's so hectic, like being a designer. And so we would communicate a bit back and forth about that, like things she'd seen me posting in the garden. So that was an inspiration for her. And then I walked the show. So I would do it. I was still kind of like, I think there was a moment where it's like, I've never been to travel. I don't want to see a plane, especially when I got back here. I don't want to have jet lag. I don't want to go anywhere. I'm fine here, a little bit closed off to the world. I think to be able to say no is good. And that's okay to turn down things and then to do it in your own time. I think that's kind of the luxury the garden offers you. I hope that you can have that balance. It's about having a balance. I think that's what we need right now in the world is the garden kind of informing our decisions. And when I say the garden, I really mean the earth, really, that first we have to take care of the earth, and then the earth will tell us what to do and how to do it when we go back into the world.
It's really about like listening to your gut or whatever it is that voice is. And it usually starts by just getting outside, not being so focused maybe on like your inner monologues per se, but just realizing that this is where you are, because devices, things have just clouded that for us. Like there is no immediacy in the now. That's beautiful. I wondered how your definition of success maybe has changed now over the course of your career and making this move back.
I want to quote him. I think I read it somewhere online. I think it was claimed that Bob Dylan said it, and I'm going to paraphrase that the man who wakes up when he wants and goes to bed when he wants and in between does what he wants is the successful man. To be on your own time. And I think we talk about time a lot here, like slowing down and doing things on your own time, because I think we're not all wired the same way. And what society requires of us is to be on the same clock all at once. And that could lead to a lot of mental illness, I think, because we're not meant to do the same things. We're not all born to do the same things. And if you can find your groove within a groove of nature, I think that would be what success is to me. That would be like a successful person, to be brave enough to let nature dictate your time.
I wondered if you could kind of transport yourself to the early days of your career, to your kind of first couple of years in New York. What advice do you wish you would have told yourself?
I could say no more. Turn down things more, that I didn't have to do it all. That way I wouldn't have been so burnt out, I think.
Yeah, it's very powerful to be able to start to put up boundaries for things and be okay with. I think there's like a frenetic energy when you live in a city where you want any opportunity that comes your way, you just say yes to it. And that can just like completely just tire you out to a point of just wanting to completely retreat from it. What legacy do you want to leave behind? What do you want to build there to kind of leave behind for the earth?
I think I started on it by planting trees that reproduce itself, and I think also, I hope that young girls particularly could see what I've done and know that it's okay to do it, meaning with the garden here. I hope to be able to turn part of it into a meditation park and a place where people can come and reflect and be proud to be farmers, to grow food. I hope that I can be an inspiration for that.
The process of slowing down, when we talk about slowing down, I think a lot of that for people who maybe haven't experienced it, a lot is lost in translation or assumptions are made. I know that slowing down actually requires a lot of work. And I would love for you to talk just about what the physical demands of your life are now and how it's different than maybe the work or the busyness that you felt in the city.
Oh, again, like my body, I'm just so tired now, actually. And it's funny because being tired in a city, like being burnt out, you don't have the will even to do anything. But I'm just physically exhausted, but I keep going anyway because I have a drive to do it, and because it's so rewarding. Yeah, is that aspect what you're talking about in terms
Absolutely.
Of slowing down and being close to nature?
Yeah.
Like lifting. I never have to go to the gym ever in my life again, which I never liked. But it's a good thing. Yeah, I don't find it hard work. I think the reverse is true, where I think one of the issues too I have with my life being so slow and most of my friends working normal jobs is that we don't really get the time to connect. Like usually they have one day off and that's to do errands. So even if they have a day free, it's really hard to connect with the rest of the world who's not slowed down. I don't know if you experience that too at all. And that's just me with the outside world. In the village here, we all connect. Like everyone's kind of on this slow time.
Well, it's beautiful that you're creating something that's kind of the bridge between the two, because I think that the only way that industries are going to change and shift is to have people that were maybe parts of those industries reflect on the things that need changing and work to fix them and create anew. And I think that creative people are oftentimes exploited and put into these like boxes to create things. And there's so much value to creative thinking and to artistic thinking and creativity. And I'm just really excited to see what the future holds for you. And I'm just really happy that you listened to that voice and you kind of released yourself from that life.
I'm happy to. I'm happy to. I never regretted it. I never looked back. I left and like I didn't even want to see pictures of Manhattan for like 2 years. I couldn't even watch it. Yes, I never looked back. In fact, I left like some stuff in storage when I first moved because I thought, well, maybe, just in case I decide to move back. And after like 3 months, I'm like, nope, that's it. I'm going. I shipped everything else. Yes, I'm happy here. I think if just sometimes connecting with the creative world, it can feel like a desert here too, creatively. So I think there are wastelands here and over on the other side. And I think if we can find a bridge to share, bring the creativity here, but also get the inspiration here and then bring some of that talent over onto the other side. So I don't think it's about throwing one way completely away, or either way, like don't throw away the garden and don't throw away the city. But I think we need to find balance, which I just think that things are just a little bit out of balance, maybe a lot out of balance right now.
Shala, it has been just an absolute pleasure to connect with you. Thank you for sharing so much wisdom with everyone. And yeah, I'm just excited to see what you continue to build and cultivate there.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Shala, for joining us on the show. Some of my key takeaways from this episode: it takes a lot of courage to tune into yourself and realize that where you are isn't where you want to be anymore. This is especially true when you've reached a level of success that others strive for, but it can be extremely liberating to make a radical change. We only have one life to live, so live it in a way that feels right. Second, tending and cultivating land is incredibly therapeutic. Tuning back into the natural world and reconnecting with its rhythms improves your overall health and well-being in profound ways. And lastly, even though the pace of fashion continues to speed up, we have the ability as consumers to reject that model and slow it down. Shop secondhand. Support small brands who don't pollute and who pay living wages. We actually have a tremendous amount of power to change the way that fashion brands function. So be very mindful of where you spend your money and how much you consume. Hi, friends. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. This is a listener-supported program that is only made possible through your continued support. And if you haven't already, we would really love it if you'd leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever service you listen on. And please recommend Urban Exodus to your friends. An enormous thank you to my incredible producer, Simone Leon, and my amazing editor, Johnny Saul, and my music man, Benjamin Bethurum. And thanks to all of you for listening. I'm Melissa Hessler, and this is the Urban Exodus.